if you're going to do it, you need to be fully committed to the process. It is not an easy process. It is time consuming. It can be emotional. You're going to have to be able to run that process while you are also running your business.
The Industrial Growth Institute podcast connects you with the big thinkers, makers, and subject matter experts across all aspects of an integrated B2B industrial revenue growth function. From strategy, board oversight, and transactions through all the phases of manufacturing marketing, the complexities of industrial sales, and the nuances of marketing and sales technology and customer experience, I speak with guests who bring insights, innovative perspectives, best practices, and twists on traditional approaches. Each episode explores high-level thinking and in-the-weeds actionable tactics. If you enjoyed these discussions, then please help me out by liking and sharing the podcast, and especially by leaving a comment and giving a review. So with no further ado, let's jump into this episode. We're back today for the Industrial Growth Institute podcast, focusing on the exit. You run and you build a company, you deal with the crap, you endure the lows, you cherish the highs, and often it's day after day putting one foot in front of the other, just getting tasks done. But there has to be a meta level reason that makes it worthwhile. And for many family-owned companies, that's legacy, preserving what has been built through years of assuming financial risk and skipped vacations and family turmoil and everything that goes with it. And in many cases, those companies are anchor employees in small communities. And the health of the business contributes, it's closely tied to the welfare of the community and to many families. Often there's also lifestyle and there's status that accompany the role as business owners and family business owners. But there also often comes a time when that's no longer the reason, or at least it's no longer the primary reason. Maybe there's a crisis of some sort, a financial crisis or market turmoil or a health crisis or a natural disaster, or maybe the rising generation simply aren't interested in working in the business. Maybe estate planning necessitates taking some chips off the table for diversification. That's one of the important roles that private equity plays for privately held industrial manufacturers. It's really opened up in the last couple decades the opportunity to capture the fruits of lifetimes of work when circumstances make it right or make it necessary. Today, Michael Horn is in the studio to talk about his experience as a G4 family business owner. Michael is a graduate of Texas A&M. He spent 4 years on active duty in the Army, first as an armor officer leading a tank platoon, and then as a military intelligence officer. After leaving active duty, he lived out the dream that many have as a ski instructor before joining the family business, AC Horn. The company is called AC Horn. Michael worked as VP of Sales and Marketing and then as President and CEO for a total of about 14 years, and then sold the family business to a strategic acquirer in early 2024. So if you're watching and listening, please hit the bell. Make sure you give the episode some social love and join me in welcoming Michael. Thanks for your willingness to talk to us today about this important story, Michael.
Well, thanks for having me on, Ed, and I appreciate that very nice introduction.
All right, let's start with the company. Give us some context and set a base for the conversation. AC Horn, give us a brief history and tell us about what the company made, who it sold it to, et cetera.
Sure. Well, in its last generation, AC Horn was known as an industrial manufacturer of equipment for nuts and for popcorn. We're talking about large machinery that's sold into factories that processes the foods that you see at the grocery store and the convenience store. Specifically, our niche and strongest part of the market was with nut butters. Something like 80 to 90% of nut butters made in North America at least ran through one of our machines.
Really?
Yeah. But bigger picture and the full history of the company, my great-grandfather founded it in 1907. It was a sheet metal fabrication company, and that's basically who we were for the first 90 years. We got into the food industry in the 70s by a chance encounter with Frito-Lay, and we started making things like conveyors and some other sheet metal parts and accessories that gave us a foot in the door and a view into the food industry. By working with Frito, it led to some other customers that we gained along the way, and it also gave my father the vision to make an acquisition. It was great working with Frito, but the thing is, when you are reliant upon one big company like that, you're up and you're down. The other issue was that we didn't have our own proprietary line. Again, conveyors are a great business, but over time they became commoditized. And so we really needed to diversify. So in 1997, my father purchased a company called Cantrell International. Cantrell was based in Fort Worth, and Cantrell had a line of machinery for nuts and for popcorn, specifically dry roasters, nut butter mills, peanut blanchers, and for popcorn, uh, poppers, air poppers, and caramelizers. So Dad bought the company, and then over time, that business effectively displaced and grew into what the company became, meaning that the sheet metal business kind of went down and the machinery business grew. And so around the time I started, the majority of our revenues were coming from the machinery sale.
And so 97 strikes me as kind of before many of the small and medium-sized businesses we're talking about in organic growth. How did your dad have that vision that that was an important strategic step? And if you were kind of involved and recall, was it traumatic? Was there a lot of teeth gnashing and concern about it, or was it a pretty simple decision?
I think that Dad had just been through a lot of Frito plants over the years, and he looked at different product lines and seen other companies making things and thought, man, we could do the same thing. I think that you feel like you're maybe second tier when you're a fabricator and you're not making your own products.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also with the up and downs of the business that he had at the time, he really needed something to bolster and strengthen the business.
Got it. All right. So obviously your name was on the business. It was your family's name on the family company. Was it really part of who you were growing up? Were you there in the summer sweeping the floors and all those kinds of stories that we hear about? Or was it just a place where your dad worked?
Oh, no, definitely. It was an identity and a lifestyle, not just a place where my dad worked, but a place where my grandfather worked. I'd go out to my grandparents' second home in California, and they had the company logo and on the gates of the garage to get into the house. I worked there in the summers when I was 16, 17 years old. My first car came from there. I knew all the employees. We had a annual Christmas party. So yeah, it was very much a part of who we were and still who we are. I mean, we sold the business, but you can't take away that part of your identity.
And was it expected as you were growing up that ultimately that would be where you'd make your career?
No. In fact, my dad was always very clear to say that my sisters and me should pursue what we want to pursue in life. We should not join the business unless we want to. Now, of course, my dad, with such deep, strong, nostalgic attachment to the business, always hoped that one of us would join the business.
Right.
Always hoped.
Right.
And of course, when I made the decision to come home and join the business, he was over the moon with excitement.
Because you were no longer a ski bum, or because you were in the family business?
Well, that's a complex question. I think he actually had a little bit of jealousy. He always wanted to live in Colorado himself and do that. But at that time, my dad was getting older, and the business, what I didn't realize when I joined, was in a slow but steady decline.
Really?
And yeah, it wasn't. We weren't in I don't think necessarily quite yet to the point where we were threatened out of existence, but things weren't going great. And I think my dad was just getting older and was tired of taking risks, and it was just worn down by the daily grind of the business.
Sure.
And there's a lot of symptoms of that all across the company in a lot of ways. And so for me to come home, especially after having had other experience, leadership experience, and then the opportunity to do something on my own that I wanted to do, I was fresh and ready to go with new ideas, new perspectives, and just gave a shot to the arm to the business.
But obviously, very strong Texas roots. You grew up there. You went to school there. You served in the Army there, except when you were deployed. Just a small break when you were in Colorado. So I've always sensed in our conversations a very clear part of your identity as being, Texas and that family orientation. But how come the Army? Was there a tradition of military service in your family?
It wasn't any one factor. It was a combination of factors. I went to Texas A&M. I joined the Corps of Cadets there. I was just captivated by the the opportunity for a challenge, opportunity to do something different. And of course, yes, there was a family tradition of military service. I grew up hearing about my mom's dad, who was a career officer. Um, so I was motivated by, yes, the family tradition, patriotism, challenge, all sorts of things. And so, yeah, and I just wanted to do something different.
All right, you jumped into the business. You left Colorado. You came back. Your dad was thrilled. The business was in a bit of a malaise, maybe my word, not yours, but it sounds like what you're describing. You became the VP of sales for 3 years,
Uh-huh.
and that was starting just shortly after the 08, 09 downturn. How much of that weakness in the company was because of the market, or how much was because your dad was tired or customers had changed around? And how did the company endure that great financial crisis?
Well, of course, that time wasn't very easy for the business, the financial crisis, and everybody was affected.
Right.
Um, it, I think it was just a multitude of factors. It's hard to assign a percentage split.
Sure.
I think uh, the biggest issue that we're within our ability to control is just the lack of clear direction on what the strategy was for the business. We still had a big chunk of our revenue was coming from job shop, the sheet metal fabrication business. We were trying to be all things to all people
Right.
at all times. The moment that Dad bought Cantrell International, we became a machinery manufacturer. We were no longer a job shop, whether we liked it or not.
Right.
We had been making conveyors for Frito-Lay and other companies for years, as well as platforms and hoppers and all sorts of other accessory items.
Mhm.
But what had not occurred since the time that we bought Cantrell is we had not paired those two disciplines and made one integrated company. The thing is, when a business is buying a nut butter mill, for example, they're going to buy the pedestal, they're going to buy a hopper, they're going to buy a conveyor to bring roasted nuts in. They might control it all from one single point of control. And there's absolutely no reason why the same OEM should not provide all of those things. And not only that, we were a company that was skilled at doing those.
Right.
And so I was really surprised that we weren't offering those things. So if you're selling a machine, just to use a fake number, for $100,000, and it's just the processing machine, but you don't even consider offering all those other items, you're not offering value to your customers in the way that you can and should. And if you bundle all of those items together and offer a complete module, you can sell all those things at a higher margin. But I think more importantly, you're offering more value to your customer because you're selling them a process. Typically, when someone is buying a piece of food process equipment, they're buying the product that comes out of the back end of it.
Right.
They're not buying a roaster that roasts 2,000 pounds an hour. They want the thing that it makes because that's what makes them money.
Right.
And so if you understand that, then you can start selling in that way.
All right, but I got to interrupt you there because in my experience, so few machinery manufacturers do understand that. They define the world through what they make, how they make it, how it's evolved over the years, what the HMI looks like, all those kinds of factors, and never stop to think about the fact that in the example you're using, a nut butter company, all they care about is full pallets going on the truck to Costco or wherever, and they don't. I mean, they want to make sure it's done correctly so that it's quality and they make good money. They don't have returns. Everyone stays healthy. Nobody gets sick. All of that. But those are essentially table stakes. They're thinking about getting the peanut butter out the door. How did you come to that realization when so few people in the machine world seem to get it?
Listening to my customers and acting on instinct.
So was that the big strategy? You mentioned you came in with energy and a fresh perspective and a shot in the arm for the business. Was that the essence of it? Hey, wait a minute. Let's take this integrated systems approach.
Yes, that we're going to offer modules and complete turnkey lines. And we're also going to invest every single dollar that we make back into the business to rebuild this place because the infrastructure was falling apart.
Did you get pushback on those?
No, I think it was the first thing we did, though, was buy a laser. We had two old lasers, and one was a laser punch combo and old shears to cut metal that my grandfather had bought in the 60s. So all of that together was a very laborious process. The first thing we did was buy a Trumpf laser with a pallet loader. And of course, I mean, that was a probably over $800,000 investment. And it was a little scary for my dad to do that because he hadn't put much back into the business in a really long time. With that said, he was also like eager and enthusiastic to do it. He evaluated 3 brands. We landed on Trumpf, which is excellent. I've got no dog in this fight, but if anyone from Trumpf is listening, it's just a shameless pitch. I think y'all make great machiners. And that, of course, over time, I think every year or every other year, just depended on how things were going. I bought a new piece of machinery and slowly replaced everything in the shop from manual machines to automated and or CNC machinery. By the time we sold, we had a laser, 2 press brakes, 6 or 7 CNCs in the shop, and I had also purchased 5 vertical lift modules or high density dynamic storage racks to control our inventory. And all of that together just made us a much better company.
And how about employees? Did they embrace that? Did they value it? Did they see that it meant the company was investing in creating a better work environment, or were they worried that automation was going to take their jobs?
Yeah, well, automation didn't take their jobs. It just put them into more skilled roles.
Okay.
So answer your question, no, everyone embraced it for the most part. I think the harder challenge when you buy automated machinery is having an effective implementation plan. That's particularly true with CNC equipment. The CNC equipment is only as good as the parts and programs that you feed it. And that's, of course, supported upstream by the people who create those things. Everyone would generally get really excited when a new piece of machinery would show up, but the implementation, especially in the long term, was the bigger challenge.
Did you ever feel a month into it like, oh my goodness, I made a mistake, and then suddenly it got on track?
No, I think though what I did feel sometimes is, why didn't we think of that? Right? That little things like, why didn't we include tooling in the budget to buy the new CNC vertical turret lathe, or get more training on programming, or consider the upstream inventory planning required to make this thing really hum, et cetera, et cetera.
Or I would argue, when you go to IMTS and everything looks beautiful and simple and, plug it in and it's going to run, why didn't the salespeople do a better job taking you through the considerations that you ought to keep in mind?
Well, I'm a commercially oriented person, so this is no disrespect towards any salesperson. I would encourage anyone making a capital purchase to, after speaking with the salesperson, go talk to the application engineer, right, or the maintenance tech. Because you're going to get a different perspective. I'm not saying the sales guy is going to mislead you. That's not it. But you need to talk to people who really know and understand how the machine is run.
Did application engineers participate in the sale of AC Horn equipment?
Oh yeah. And towards the end, I say towards the end, about halfway through my time as CEO, I beefed up the engineering staff to accommodate those types of requests.
All right. So you mentioned your time as CEO. At some point along the way, 3 or 4 years into it, you were the VP of sales, and then you had a rather abrupt succession. You replaced your dad as president and CEO. Talk about that.
Correct. So in 2014, my father passed away unexpectedly. He died in a bicycle accident. He was out riding his bike on the 5th of July, 2014. And at the end of his ride, he just went over the handlebars and it hit his head. It was, of course, a sad and really tragic moment for my family. But it was just his time. Interestingly enough, my father had just recently been diagnosed with Alzheimer's like 8 weeks before. He was still in the early phases of it and living his life as normally as he could. I guess the silver lining, if you could call it that, is that we didn't have to see him suffer.
Right.
Obviously, no one in our family wanted to lose my dad at all. But he went out on top. When he passed away, the church was packed. There was like 1,500 people there. It was live streamed, and there were people who came from all over the world or who logged in to see the memorial service. It was a very moving moment. Of course, for me, I had to take over the business immediately.
Right.
And that was tough. At the same time, we had a great team of loyal employees who gave their lives and their careers to the business. They were there to support me. Our customers were there to support me. And we were also in an industry where we had a steady demand because people keep eating.
Right.
So that helps. So as long as you manage your team and your relationships and just keep your eye on the ball, you'll get through it. But to say that it was very difficult would be an understatement. It took about 2 years before I felt like I could catch my breath.
Obviously, you described quite a tribute to your dad. But this also wasn't the first time that the company had experienced an emergency succession. Presumably, I'm guessing that there were some lessons learned from the earlier time. Maybe you could share those with other lower middle market family-owned businesses. Just some things to do in the background. Although you had a difficult 2 years ramp up, there must have been some pieces in place that helped you make that transition.
Well, I'll say this: I'm very grateful that I had 3 years alongside my father to learn the business, to learn who the customers were, just to learn how the business ticked. Had I not had that, I'm not sure what would have happened if my father passed away and I was still in the Army or living elsewhere. So that was the biggest difference maker. To one of the other things you said, yes, when my great grandfather passed away unexpectedly in September of 1946. Around that same time, my grandfather had just returned from World War II. He was planning to re-enter the insurance industry where he had worked before the war. And the recruiter from Travelers Insurance, where he was going to work, actually persuaded him to keep the family business open.
Really?
And he did. And if we hadn't have done that, we wouldn't be talking.
Wow.
I'm not sure there's any lessons learned from that other than like, I guess when a Horn comes back from a war, he goes and takes over the family business when his dad dies.
Got it.
Put your head down, work through problems, and just keep putting one foot in front of the other. That's I guess the lesson. To the bigger point that I think that you're getting at about succession planning, all I can say is that takes a long time and requires a lot of thought. It might require some outside help to really think about it. I would say that in general, any business owner should really be thinking first and foremost about what would happen if he's not there, no matter how that were to occur. He should also be thinking about his management team and making sure that the management team's processes are well documented and defined, and roles and responsibilities are defined, and there is a succession plan for key people. The more that those succession plans are in place, the healthier the business is going to be in the event of unexpected departure.
You mentioned the customers and the employees, I assume also vendors that helped you through that transition. How about a board? Was there a strong board with some independent directors that helped guide you as you took that role? Or was it like many family businesses where the board was just a formality?
We were the latter. The board was just a formality. Of course, I love my mom and sisters, and they're wonderful. And we worked together closely on the sale of the business. In hindsight, that's one of the things that I would have done differently is establish a board. At our size company, probably 2 advisors would have been sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
And but lessons learned.
Sure. You mentioned documented standard processes. You mentioned having the plan in place for when a leader is suddenly no longer available. Those strike me as important lessons you learned from your Army experience, where, we both were junior military officers in the Army. You're trained when the green tab leader goes down, who's stepping into that role. It needs to be seamless. People need to be comfortable assuming that responsibility. Obviously, everything is built around process and practice and training and rehearsal. Did you find that the Army experience particularly prepared you for the transition and then for your leadership as president and CEO?
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the very first things that I did when I started in the business, even just as the new guy in VP of sales, was create an org chart and define roles and responsibilities. And after that, try to define processes. the org chart was and roles and responsibilities was much easier than defining processes, because you can spend all day long writing things out, making PowerPoint slides, whatever, but getting people to embrace the concept and follow it rather than to take the path of least resistance every day is a lot harder.
That's obviously a huge challenge in marketing and sales too. That's where I spend my days, working with manufacturers, trying to help them bring the rigor that they often have implemented in the back end of the business, as you're describing, and apply it to the front end. You were involved, either directly responsible or as the business leader, in industrial sales and marketing from 2011 into 2024. Went through quite some turmoil in the world. How did you see the company evolving the way that it marketed and sold over that time?
Well, we just, as time went by, we got much better at selling to our strengths, which was our core product line for nuts, nut butters, and popcorn. Like paying attention to our customers, what they wanted, whether it was a simple standalone machine or a complete automated turnkey line or something in between. That became our focus, and as time went by, we became recognized as a market leader. People knew us in those industries, especially in nuts. But I think if you were to drive up and down Highway 99 in California, you'll run into a lot of AC Horn customers and now Probot customers that weren't AC Horn or now Probot customers 15 years ago.
Right. Over that time, you were evolving how you marketed and sold, listening to buyers. How did you see buyer behaviors changing?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that I'd like to answer that question by separating smaller, independently owned, like owner-operator companies, and bigger companies. The change was by far more visible and obvious and affected us with the bigger companies. The first is that automation and the procurement process has led to a bureaucratic approval process that's actually slower and more difficult to deal with, not the other way around. A lot of bigger companies, you'll have the technical guy review it and say, this is what we want, and then pass it over to purchasing and you start over. When you add a layer of automation, it just makes things confusing and difficult. The other thing that happened in that to that point is that there's been a lot of consolidation in the food industry, especially in the snack industry. So there was a time, let's say 15, 20 years ago, when there were 100 companies and now there are 20,
right,
at least of the major brands. And you've got one or two gatekeepers at the top of those companies that handle all of the capital decisions. And so getting to those guys can be really difficult. So one day you might be doing business with someone you know really well, and it's this privately held business. Yeah, it's maybe bigger, but you do a lot of business with them. And then a year later, they've been sold and you don't even know who to talk to.
right.
I think that whether we're talking big company or small company, there's been a general expectation of faster turnaround with more detailed information on quotes on a lot of different fronts. That's been a challenge to deal with. With all that said, the reason why I separate the big company versus small company is there is a certain amount of just old-fashioned business that still exists in the food industry, which is one of the things that makes it fun. Mm-hmm. Honestly, a lot of times we were dealing with Ed Marsh Nut Company, and Ed and his brother have owned the business for a while, and they wanted to add a peanut butter line, and now is the time. And you're doing things the same way you used to do, and we've always done, where you fly out to their facility and you walk into an open warehouse and you say, this is where we want to put the equipment. And you just imagine what goes there, and then you go back and you talk to your engineering team, create a quote and layout, yada yada. That still occurs in the food industry. So it just kind of depends on who you're dealing with.
So what happens if a company like yours says, you know what, it's just not worth the hassle of dealing with those 20 consolidated companies. We want to build our business by building relationships with the mid-sized family-owned businesses. Can you survive?
It would be harder, okay, because you're going to miss out on bigger projects. With that said, it's been my observation that those bigger companies also like to work with the bigger equipment manufacturers because there's a matching scale with resources that exist in positions that where there's a counterpoint on the other side that work together. That doesn't mean it's not possible for the smaller ones to sell to the big boys. But if you completely cut yourself off from those opportunities, you miss out on growth.
I think in a lot of cases, it's a risk mitigation sort of a strategy. I mean, if I'm an engineer that's working for one of the 50 biggest food companies, and I decide that I'm going to suggest that we buy some equipment made by a smaller, reputable, long-standing, but significantly smaller company, it's a significant career risk for me. Whereas if I go with a company that may have a mediocre, kind of center of mass sort of solution, but it's like the old thing, nobody got fired for buying IBM. If I suggest we buy from them, nobody's going to say I'm an idiot.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And also think about it too. If you're coming from a big food company, your product needs to look, feel, and most importantly, taste the exact same, whether you buy it in Miami or Maine. And if the factory that makes the product that goes to Miami is different from the factory in Maine and has different machinery, the guy who picked the wrong company, he's getting fired. I get let back in the industry.
Right. All right. So that's talking about your experience selling, marketing and selling. But all the time you were running a business, you were on the other side. You had a lot of vendors cold calling you. When you were sitting in the CEO chair, you talked about how you talked to sales reps and then you wanted to talk to application engineers and maintenance engineers. But what was effective when people were trying to sell to you? What resonated with you?
I think when you can establish like a true partnership with the supplier, where they're able to come up with standard offers, standard pricing, blanket orders, that's really helpful. I think, but before you even get to there, if you really can um, take a step back and just look at your company, understand who you are, what you do, what makes you tick. They're not just coming to have just a transactional relationship. They truly want to become an extension of your business. That's challenging when you make an engineer to order product. If you were to line up an AC horn, roaster, pick any company, doesn't matter, and line up their standard machine, the last 100 that they've built, they'd be 95% the same, but that last 5% with whatever it's the utilities, voltage and gas or whatever it is, or slight elevation differences, guarding, you name it, those last little differences are the most important part. And when you have an application engineer or a technical sales lead from your suppliers who understands how all that works and can effectively partner with you to supply the critical components that you need to make those machines work well, then that's really what's going to make the difference in having good supplier relationships.
So you spoke in glowing terms of Trump. How did Trump sell to you that established them so strongly in your mind as a wonderful vendor?
Well, Trump is a little bit different than what I was referring to, Trump being a capital equipment supplier. With that said, Trump has excellent educational events. They host customers. They go through in great detail at their facility in Farmington, Connecticut, as well as at their smart factory outside of Chicago. So just the whole process of selling Trump on the front end is fantastic. And then they also have great, regional distributors. The one that we use is located 10 minutes from AC Horn, and they're always responsive. Had a great team. It's called Sterling Fab Tech, and we always enjoyed working with them. But as far as what I'm referring to more are the components that go into making our machines. I would say similarly, though, the companies that really have the technical resources in-house to qualify and validate the components that you're going to use as standard pieces that will vary based on application and where it's going in the world.
That's really funny I shouldn't say funny, an interesting observation that you were a company that made capital equipment. And when you think of your purchasing operation, you're thinking of kind of the OEM stuff that you're buying and not the capital equipment. Obviously, you see those in your mind as being very different. I suspect that the companies you sell to did as well.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, that's definitely, I guess, categorically, like you approach it differently.
Right. I tried from, but
One other important thing I really think it's worth mentioning. You're talking about what evolved over time. I'll tell you, I think the biggest change that occurred in the food industry over the last 15 some odd years. When I first started, there were a lot of overseas markets that we could sell into, places like India and even China, believe it or not, and in Latin America. And in those places, there were not a lot of options of local national manufacturers if they existed at all. Now, a lot of those emerging markets have multiple manufacturers, and there's little to no chance that an American or even a European manufacturer could sell into those developing world markets. And the script is starting to get flipped, where some of those companies overseas are trying to sell into the US market. And you think about it, like if I try to sell a machine in India, that's 12 time zones away. Like if you need someone to come help to fix it, I mean, even if you can afford it, like just the concern over support is huge. So if the machine costs half, you don't have to worry about shipping it overseas, and there can be a technician that can deploy in a couple of hours, maybe even 30 minutes, depending upon where your location is. Like you have no unique selling points against that company. So I think what I've observed, a lot of the bigger OEMs of machinery, both processing and packaging, doing is they've established either local manufacturing partnerships in those emerging markets, or outright built their own factories to manufacture and to sell in those markets, because otherwise they're just not going to be able to compete anymore. And so you've just narrowed where you can sell. But I think, of course, a big fear for a lot of American manufacturers is now when some of those emerging market manufacturers are established enough, they're showing up over here. And you think, too, we're a country that has a lot of immigrants. And so if you're a person who moved from India or Turkey or someplace like that, where they have good manufacturing, you might know someone back in the country where you moved from, or your parents or grandparents moved from, who can connect you to those manufacturers. And so it makes it can make it challenging to sell against those. Whereas in the past, we just didn't have to deal with that overseas competition.
Yeah, you prompt two thoughts. First of all, you might not need the family connection to find that manufacturer. All you got to do is go to Pack Expo or any of the other major shows, and the international pavilions are massive. I mean, they're all here selling. The other thing that I've observed is that many of those multinationals that set up their own partnership JV or their own manufacturing operation overseas often then add that as a distinct branded lower cost solution that they bring back and sell here and in developed markets as well. So you've got used machines as competition. You've got import machines as competition. You've got import from the major brands as competition. Plus you've got domestic manufacturers. Plus, of course, you've got the competition of doing nothing and the status quo and adding an extra shift and all the other kinds of business considerations that compete against buying new capital equipment too.
No question about it.
I tried, I think, to reach you for about 9 months. I never received any acknowledgement. I got no call back. You never opened any of the emails. And then one day you returned my voicemail. Do you remember why you did or what you said?
You know, honestly, I think the emails might have just gotten blocked by the spam blocker.
Probably.
I'm not sure. Along the way, I changed out our managed service provider to a company that was much more security focused. No, I think afterwards I listened to your voicemail, and it sounded interesting. I don't know, maybe something switched in my brain after I sold, and thought it would be nice to get to know each other. I think here's what I'll tell you. I think when you own a business, you've got to just be really guarded a lot, and sometimes you might be too guarded. I mean, I would have this happen all the time when I'd be sitting in my office and it's right next to the front of the building. And I hear someone walk in and it's a salesperson cold calling. They got a job to do, but they get real creative and asking for Michael and act like I'm friends with Michael. And I like to talk to him and I don't know who this guy is and I don't want to talk to him.
Right.
I've, no animosity towards a sales guy trying to do his job. But if I spent my day talking to people like that, I wouldn't get anything done.
Right.
And so when I get a cold call from someone who might have not only good intentions, but might be a meaningful relationship to establish, it was kind of hard to discern when that was worth answering.
And that's such a critical point, because let's assume that, 20% of the salespeople reaching out to you might have some legitimate insight that could potentially trigger the way you think about a problem differently or give you some ideas on how to solve it. But so often, because you're so focused, because you're so overwhelmed with supply chain issues and talent management and, making payroll and everything else that's going on, there just isn't time for it. And that's fundamentally the huge challenge that sales teams face, particularly extraordinary salespeople, because if they legitimately have value to offer, the trick is to get in front of somebody and to have a long enough conversation that they say, you know what? You sound like you're worth my investing 30 minutes with. Along the way, because you had that experience, because you heard those conversations at the reception desk, how did you coach your sales team to try to help them reach your peers in companies that they were trying to sell to?
Well, I think that there's a big difference between a guy going door to door trying to sell freight, which is a commoditized product, or an application engineer who might have a great product, but the engineering effort required is not something that we have the capacity to take on, versus a machinery manufacturer where we have to do very little hard selling and very little cold calling. I would coach the sales team to not hard sell at all unless they have to. And when you have to, meaning you've got to give a PowerPoint presentation or something like that in a conference room to just explain the features and benefits. I would say 90+% of the time in capital equipment sales, if you get the meeting, there's no need to do any hard selling at all. So I think kind of some of the challenges that you're describing of getting people to listen weren't necessarily the biggest challenge that we had on the sales front.
Got it.
I think in capital sales, you have really, really long sales cycles. So what's important, maybe most important, is to maintain some form of constant communication with viable customers, both existing and potential. And you want to do it in a way that's authentic and not harassing or annoying. I'll say this. If I go visit a customer and I'm selling something, it's a capital piece of machinery. If we're at his facility, we're going to talk as much as he needs, as long as he needs, about the equipment, how we're going to build it, install it, et cetera, whatever the need is. But if there's an opportunity to go out and have lunch, coffee, dinner, et cetera, I'm going to do almost no talking about anything business related unless the customer wants to.
Right.
I'd rather get to know them so we can know each other, know how we tick, know what our kids do, where you like to go on vacation, what car you like to drive, et cetera, so that we can get to trust each other.
Right.
Because also when you're dealing with capital equipment, it's a marriage. You sell a piece of machinery, and that machinery is going to be running in your facility for the next 20 years.
Or not running. And whoever makes the decision is on the hook. If it doesn't run, they don't look good.
Right. And you need to know who to call.
Right.
And you need to be able to break down those barriers so that when there's an issue, you can solve it.
After the first few months of COVID uncertainty, kind of we got through the first half of 2020, many machinery companies, particularly in the food space, saw explosive growth. Many saw capacity booked out for 12 or 18 months. And that certainly created operational challenges, but it took care of any sort of a sales problem. I saw many companies do what I would characterize as misunderstand that as actually as reflecting sales excellence, as opposed to, in retrospect, it seems like it was clearly just the market pull through. So they received orders rather than won them. And I know you and I have chatted in the past. You've got some theories about the payroll protection program, PPP money, and how that could have shaped CapEx. Talk a little bit about what you think you saw now that you've had some time to reflect on it.
Well, the first thing I would say is, regardless of market conditions, even if market conditions are favorable, you still need a capable, skilled salesperson to close a sale. And so it's not like, I think sometimes there's conflicts in engineering heavy companies between the salespeople and the engineers. The engineers often falsely think that the salesperson just holds up a net in the air and lets it flow into it
and collects money.
Yeah, otherwise they just go out and get drunk with customers and waste time, and that's just not true. With that said, um, during the first couple of months of COVID, the economy was kind of on pause. However, at that time, food manufacturers were running 24 hours a day, 8 days a week with no break for maintenance because people were filling their pantries. They weren't going out to eat.
Right.
Your salaries need to come from somewhere. So people were buying packaged foods. And then as time went by, the government unleashed an enormous amount of money, and any company that could got their hands on up to $10 million of free cash. And from the time the PPP started to when it finished, interest rates were still really low. So every company in America that could had excess cash and could borrow lots of money. That created the conditions to pull forward years of CapEx. And if you had the idea of expanding your company, you probably were going to consider it. I know on our side, we bought, and it was in that period of time, we bought several vertical lift modules for our inventory system. And as time went by, each time we purchased one, the lead time got longer and longer and longer.
Right.
And of course, anything dealing with warehouses has some connection, at least for the portion of the business, to e-commerce. And so if you're buying stuff on the internet, it's got to be stored somewhere. And so those companies who deal with that type of inventory management systems are doing really well. So anyway, long story short, I think food industry, people eating at home, working from home, free government money, low interest rates, conditions for a boon for the food industry. But it was also critical for those companies to manage it really, really well.
What advice do you have? You're out of the world now. If you were sitting down at lunch somewhere and having a conversation with one of your peers who still runs a machinery company that today may be experiencing a little bit of that overhang where it pulled forward demand and now they're having a harder time, they find that orders have slowed a little bit. What advice would you have for them on how to find business and how to continue to grow in that environment?
I would imagine that focusing on the existing install base and really strengthening those relationships to the extent that you can, to whether you sell more parts rebuilds, new machines for replacement machines when the opportunity is right, but you just need to be really close to them and know what's going on with those businesses. I think also there could be opportunities for industrial automation. The cost of labor and the availability of technical labor is a challenge for a lot of people in the industrial space. So if you have the ability to automate your processes, you're going to be a lot stronger. And so if those opportunities to sell are there, I think industrial manufacturers should capitalize on it.
Shifting gears, how did a Texas boy get interested in skiing?
There's a lot more of us than you might think. If you drive down Highway 287 in December, anywhere from December to end of March between Dallas and Colorado, you'll see the highway packed with people driving up to the mountains to go skiing. So I grew up skiing at least once a year with my family, and my dad loved it and I loved it. I mean, I'm far from the first person to go up to the mountains and just be captivated by the magic of the Rockies.
Sure. Do you still ski?
I do. do. And fortunately, I've been taking let's call it a self-imposed break or a sabbatical, and I was able to ski a whole bunch this last year after I exited.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
What other hobbies or interests have you been able to dig into or cultivate now that you have more time?
Sure. Well, I spend a lot of time on my boat out here in Grapevine, and my son plays competitive baseball. And whether you're working or not, that's going to take a whole lot of your time. And we had a really fun season, spring and summer, and taken some fun trips. And I'm about to hop on an airplane to go on a cruise with my family in Italy and Croatia. So just been able to pursue some of my own interest a little bit more. And done some volunteering and just evaluating what's next and for my next opportunities.
Do you have any regrets about having to have put many of those things on hold while you were running the company?
No, I've taken what life has given me. In my life, I definitely don't feel any regret on. But I'll tell you, obviously, running a business, owning a business is a lot harder to have balance in your life and pursuing your interests. There's no question about that.
Let's shift to talking more specifically about your exit journey. To your knowledge, had the family ever considered a sale before you started to look at that process?
I think as my dad was getting older, my mom and my dad discussed it here and there. To what extent they ever had a serious conversation about it, like in tangible terms, I'm not too sure.
And what prompted you to decide, okay, it's time. We need to get serious about this?
Well, I think that goes back to when I started. I came in the business, this institution that's been in my life my whole life. I admire my dad, my grandfather. I know the story. I love the history of the business. I'm just captivated by it. But I come in the business and we're struggling on a lot of fronts. We no strategy. The place is falling apart. Um, just a lot of other daily challenges. And I see my dad's health and steady decline with the business. About 6 months after I started, I saw a company sell to a strategic buyer. And I saw what a wonder it did for the brand, for the employees, and for the owners to take risk off the table. That company was called Spray Dynamics. We had an informal partnership with them, and they sold the heat and control. And it was not an easy task for them to sell the heat and control and integrate to them, but in the long term, I think it was of great benefit. And of course, Heat and Control was a company that I still to this day admire a lot. And I thought in that moment, compared my father's situation, the company's situation to what Spray Dynamics did. And I said, that's my goal. That's what I want to do. There isn't a whole lot of literature on fifth generation family businesses. They do exist, but in very, very small numbers.
Right.
Statistically, it is very, very hard to continue a business from one generation to the next.
Sure.
So going from a fourth to a fifth is going to be even more difficult. And I felt strongly that we needed to be able to end the business on our terms eventually when the time was right. And so there was not necessarily this specific aha moment. It was more of a matter of waiting for the right opportunity.
And you obviously had other shareholders. Was it a long journey to wrangle them, or were they completely on board with your vision?
I'm very fortunate that my family was 100% on board the whole time.
Wow. You looked at a variety of options. Did you feel strongly one way or the other about a financial buyer versus a strategic acquirer? I mean, your original vision had come from that strategic acquisition.
I think that I always wanted to sell it to a strategic buyer. I would say in general terms that if you're wanting to sell your business, everybody wants to sell to a strategic for a lot of reasons, but you've got to keep your options open, whether or not you want to sell to a strategic buyer or financial buyer. There's a lot of negativity about private equity, some of that for good reason, but there are experienced operators out there who know and understand businesses in different markets and spaces. And so it's worth keeping an open mind if you're thinking about selling your business.
And how about a recap? Was that ever an option, or was the plan to fully exit the business?
No, not really. I think we really just wanted to sell and
Got it.
make a full exit. Yeah.
So, I mean, you've commented publicly on a number of LinkedIn posts about the importance of an M&A advisor and how you found the right M&A advisor to be transformative in this journey for yourself. Talk about that experience, how you came to that, and why you think it's so important.
Well, I think when you run a business, you get so caught up in the day to day, and you know your business inside and out. But the process of selling a business is very, very different. There's a lot of details. It's time intensive. It just requires a lot of management of the cadence of the process. And over the years, prior to selling the company, I had various interactions with different groups, whether it be investors or private equity people, and I'd had some conversations with some other potential buyers. And those conversations went. I, some of them didn't go anywhere. Some of them went pretty far. It just kind of depended on the situation. And I reached a point when I realized I needed some help.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a family friend who I know who put me in contact with an M&A advisor, and it was the best decision I ever made. It's a very specific skill set to sell a company. And you may think that you know your business, and maybe you know your business inside and out and you're expert, but you'll have no idea how to sell it.
And do you distinguish, it sounds from your language like you distinguish between something you're calling an M&A advisor versus, for instance, a boutique sell-side investment bank, or are they the same thing?
I'm not sure I have enough discipline to use the terms interchangeably. I think that a lot of those boutique investment bankers may also refer to themselves as M&A advisors. I think typically a small industrial is going to look for a boutique M&A advisor that sells companies between 8 to 10 million in revenue, all the way up to like 150 to 250 million
Sure.
in rev. Of that, you might need a bigger advisor, but truthfully, I'm not sure you'd want to talk to an M&A advisor to find out what their area of expertise is before proceeding.
Right.
Yeah.
How did you manage that workload? You talk about how it's a lot of work to sell the business. During diligence and negotiation, you're still running your business. Were you working 20 hours a day, or were balls dropping? What was going on?
I don't really have an easy answer to that question.
You've blocked it all out because it's an unpleasant memory.
I don't know about that. It's just a lot of work, and you've got to keep your eye on the ball and stay focused and organized and focus on what's most important that particular day and try not to get overwhelmed. But there's no secret. If you go through a sale process, it's going to consume all of your time, most of your thoughts, and all of your energy.
At what point did you realize the deal was likely to actually happen? Or was it not until the wire actually hit your account?
Well, I mean, I guess a deal's not done until it's done. I think, let me just answer that in a general sense. I think when there's commitment on both sides of the table for any business transaction and both sides are committed, it'll happen, whether that's selling a machine or selling a business.
And did you have any moments of self-doubt about the decision along the way? Ever say, geez, I wonder if we're going down the right path, or you had such a clear vision that you knew you were?
Never once. Probot is an amazing company. They're also a fourth generation. They're family owned and still owned by, I think you can look it up, I think it's 3 families that started it. There's a lot of amazing, talented people who work there, who I really enjoyed getting to know. And so, getting paired with the right strategic buyer also put my mind at ease.
Got it.
Yeah. So there's just a lot of similarities.
And when the deal closed, did you take vacation, or did you show up for work the next day?
Showed up for work the very next day.
It must have felt different, though.
It was. It was different, and I'll be honest with you, it was a little uncomfortable. But I was also still like really excited about it, and eager to enter the new phase, and get to know new coworkers, and be supportive of integrating the business that I had worked so hard to rebuild.
Right.
With the new buyer. So yeah, it was a lot of enthusiasm, excitement. There was anxiety about it, and the part of it was bittersweet because it was the end of a 117-year family tradition.
How did you
But
share the news with your employees?
we made a big announcement. So we had a big town hall meeting, and that was actually broadcast all around the world at all the different sites at Probot on like a Zoom live stream. And the people were pretty surprised about it. But like I said, we had a great team, still have a great team, a lot of people who I miss seeing. And they supported AC Horn, and they supported Probot through the transition.
You've offered very clear advice in a number of venues that when somebody's in the process, they need to hire an advisor. But stepping back, think about what advice you might have for business owners who are, they're just kind of motoring along. Maybe they have a vision that ultimately they want to sell, but today they're concentrating on growing the business, keeping it healthy. What steps should they take in that pre-stage? Well, maybe they haven't decided to sell it yet, but what, to maintain optionality, what kinds of things could they be doing so that when the time comes for a transaction, they're in a better position?
First thing I would say is, even if you haven't decided to sell, you should always, always be thinking about where the exit ramp is. Always. With that said, 2 simple things. Have clean books that can be verified, and hire an M&A advisor. Even if you're not sure you want to sell, go talk to one, because they'll be able to take a look at your business and tell you what steps you need to make to have it sellable. Even if it's not decided, you should always be thinking about it.
And what about thinking about the other side of that coin? What about thinking about acquisitions as another option?
Like in what way?
Well, so if the goal is we want to keep our options open, one option is we take some chips off the table. Another option is we double down and we grow. Any thoughts on how somebody might approach that, since you had watched your dad go through that process?
I think similarly, it would be probably best to find a professional who could help you in that process. With that, so you could hire an M&A advisor who could help you with an active search to seek out, companies that you might know that could be interested in doing that. With that said, also, there's so many small and medium-sized industrial companies that you might be surprised at the reaction that you get in the response. If you just call an owner and say, "Hey, this is me. I'm thinking about buying another company. Your company looks interesting. Can we talk?" And that might get you farther than you think. With that said, if you're going to go through a formal process to buy or sell, you need a professional team to do it successfully.
Right. You mentioned that in retrospect, you might have added an advisory board with a couple outsiders. How about that as a step for companies just wanting to maximize value toward whatever end? Any advice on upgrading the board to include broader skills and perspectives?
Well, I just think that it's not just a matter of hiring a board, it's hiring the right board with the right skill set and people who have dealt with the same or similar business challenges. I'm not sure I have the right answer. My default answer seems to be hire an outside professional, but really and truly, there are professionals out there who specialize in placing board members. Sure. Who have the right qualifications. And that's how I would approach it.
But first, the company has to decide internally that they're willing to, number one, have independent directors, not just family members. And number two, that they're willing to be challenged. If you bring in somebody with additional expertise that starts talking about things that aren't what you've always talked about in board meetings, which are kind of, a gateway to cocktail hour in some cases, then, you have to be willing to embrace the fact that they're going to challenge some of your thinking.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the thing is, what you're doing in a way is putting a permission structure in place to make major decisions where you didn't have to before. Right. And that can be really hard. I mean, I think when you own and run your own business, you can develop kind of an ego about it.
Sure.
Maybe in a healthy way. Nevertheless, you're going to have some humility and willingness to bring on someone else who's going to tell you no.
Right. Or make you work for the yes.
Yeah. or encourage you to spend money on something that you don't think is valuable.
How about G3 or G4 coming into a longstanding family business? You've walked in their shoes, albeit, 15 or 20 years ago. What advice would you have for them?
I would say that you need to think about your business like it's an asset, not an heirloom. Assets have value, values go up and down, and you need to think very carefully about the roles and responsibilities of the incoming generation. I would say specifically, it is best for a G3 or G4 to work somewhere else for a meaningful amount of time in a similar field, or maybe in a different field, or maybe both, before they enter in the family business. If you have no yardstick by which to measure yourself, if you've not made mistakes, if you've not been subordinate to someone else before you come in and are in charge of other people, you'll have a lot harder time being successful.
Right.
So I think, and then like within the business, I think a business owner should always try to build his business around positions, not people. So have a defined org chart with defined roles and responsibilities and defined processes that are followed and embraced by middle management. And all of that stuff pairs together. Reason being, you might think as the owner operator that your kids or your grandkids or whoever are going to want to come into the business, and maybe they will, but maybe it won't work out. It's hard, right? I mean, I still love the business. I love the idea of the business. I love the legacy. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of having sold it. I'm grateful to Probot. Again, I can't say enough great things about them as a business. But all of that is something that you just have to kind of put in a box and tuck it away in order to make a smart business decision.
I love that expression, asset, not heirloom. I think that's a great way to capture it. Did you guys ever, one of the ideas that I've heard that can help family-owned businesses maintain that discipline is an annual return on equity calculation. So you're making an informed decision. If we were to liquidate and invest this money somewhere else, or if we were to sell and invest this money somewhere else, what would it generate? And let's at least as an element of our thinking about this, use that as another factor in addition to legacy and ego and all the other kinds of things. Did you guys ever do that return on equity calculation?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't really like that. The decision was just more, I guess, ideological, philosophical about whether it was worth it to continue on into the future, whether the growth and the things that we had done to rebuild the company could continue in the right trajectory, or if it would be better for that same thing to be picked, that same upward trajectory to be picked up and scaled globally by a global company.
So what resources do you recommend besides your advice to find an M&A advisor? But if another family-owned company just wants to think about options for the future, have you found any books or advisors or blogs or podcasts that you think are really worthwhile listening to or paying attention to?
Well, I think your podcast is a good place to start.
Well, that's kind of you to say, but that wasn't what I was fishing for.
Oh, I know. I'm just trying to stroke your ego a little bit, Ed. I would say that probably the first thing to do is, evaluate your leadership team and make sure you have the right people.
For some reason, your mic kind of dropped out. I don't know if your arm is blocking it or something.
No, it's not. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's okay. Just start again answering that if you would.
Sure. Well, I think, again, focusing on your leadership team to make sure you have the right team in place that works well together. And like making sure you have a good financial leader who's not just a bean counter, but an ops-minded person is really, really important. As far as there's really an endless amount of resources out there, both podcasts and books that can be really helpful. I also think that of maybe greater value is seeking out a mentor. beyond just having a board
Right.
is of great benefit. Someone who will take the time to get to know you, learn how you tick, and then also learning how the business ticks.
And there's certain things that you want to disclose to the board. I mean, as a CEO, the board is your boss. And sometimes you want to have a confidential conversation and kick the trash can or whatever the case may be with somebody different.
Oh, yeah.
Are you open to folks getting in touch with you to talk about your journey and lessons learned?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
What's the best way? Connect on LinkedIn or what?
Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn, and look forward to reaching to meeting other people and chatting with them, and open to collaboration on a variety of fronts.
Okay, wrap us up. 3 minutes on what you would say lower middle market industrial manufacturers need to understand about the decision process and the execution of a liquidity event. Put a bow around this conversation.
Well, I would say that if you're going to do it, you need to be fully committed to the process. It is not an easy process. It is time consuming. It can be emotional. And it is, you're going to have to be able to run that process while you are also running your business. So when you decide to do it, go in head first, all the way. You can't just do it halfway. I would also say that you should really have a long, hard look at your business and determine whether or not it's worth it to own the business in the future. You've got to weigh out a lot of different things. What's the value of the business right now? What will the value of the business be in 3 years? Is it something I enjoy, or is it something I'm losing interest in? And if you really have an honest conversation with yourself, your family members, and then view it, like I said earlier, as an asset and not an heirloom, if you think about it in those terms, you'll make better decisions.
That's a great way to wrap it up. Thank you so much for opening up, sharing the details of this important transition that you made, spending time with me and the Industrial Growth Institute podcast audience today. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And for those listening and watching, please, again, show us some social love, like, share, comment, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you prefer to consume podcast content on. Thanks for listening and watching.